I am Carol Harvey, Bay Area Investigative Reporter. Commonwealth Club of California panel discussion, June 3, 2014. The Commonwealth Club is a nonprofit organization which holds forums on public issues. It is headquartered at 110 the Embarcadero, San Francisco, California. 6 years following this 2014 Commonwealth Club panel discussion, I uploaded video I shot in 2014 because this forum holds one key to unlocking Treasure Island's toxic history.
Welcome to tonight's meeting of the Commonwealth Club of California. Find us on the internet at www.commonwealthclub.org. I'm Ann Clark, a member of the Commonwealth Club and chair of the Environment and Natural Resources Member-Led Forum. Our program tonight is sponsored by the Business and Leadership Member-Led Forum, Kevin O'Malley, Chair, and the Health and Medicine Member-Led Forum, Chair William Grant. Our program tonight is Secrets of Treasure Island, Uncovering the Navy's Radioactive Legacy.
Moderators, investigative reporters Matt Smith and Katharine Mieszkowski. The panelists are Kai Vetter, nuclear physicist, professor in residence, UC Berkeley. George Moore, Monterey Institute of International Studies. Previously with International Atomic Energy Agency tracking world's radioactive material. Dale Smith, longtime Bay Area Citizen Advisory Board member, monitoring toxic and radioactive cleanup at former Bay Area Naval bases.
It is a pleasure for me to introduce tonight our moderator, Matt Smith. Matt is a reporter with the Center for Investigative Reporting. Matt will introduce you to our distinguished panel members and our discussion tonight about Treasure Island. Matt?
Thank you very much for coming. The distinguished co-host that I will introduce is my great colleague, Katharine Mieszkowski, who for better part of a year worked with me.
Thanks, Matt. Treasure Island is scheduled to be redeveloped to become home to 20,000 people. It's been a military base which is now being cleaned up. And during that cleanup, some San Franciscans have been living in old military housing on the former base. I see some of those residents here in the audience tonight, and we're very glad they could be with us. Matt and I spent a year looking at the Navy's radioactive waste cleanup, which has been heavily criticized by its own workers and government health regulators. We have three distinguished panelists with us tonight. They'll help us understand what's been going on at Treasure Island and how it fits into the broader historical and political context. Kai Vetter is a nuclear physicist and professor in residence at UC Berkeley. He has more than 20 years of experience in radiation detection and measurement. Kai co-founded Kelp Watch 2014, which has used coastal kelp beds as detectors of possibly radioactive seawater arriving from Fukushima. George Moore comes to us from the Monterey Institute of International Studies, where he's a scientist in residence. Until 2012, he was an International Atomic Energy Agency official concerned with tracking the world's radioactive material and helping make sure it didn't get into the wrong hands. Dale Smith is a longtime member of citizen advisory boards that monitor toxic and radioactive cleanup at former military bases in the Bay Area, including Treasure Island. So we're so glad they could all be here.
So Treasure Island, as many of you probably know, has sort of a dual history. The public long knew about that shoal that's been filled in with rock and other material as the home of the 1939 Golden Gate International Exposition, and it was a base for sailors and other military personnel as they prepared to ship out to the Pacific. So on-base newspapers and other sort of public type material from that period, as we spent a long time sorting through records at the National Archive, show sports scores, basketball, baseball, parades, sort of what you might expect counting as news for 1,000 or so people sitting idle for many months as they wait for something to actually happen. An idyllic place where military members cool their heels before the big show in the Pacific. What didn't get reported, and the public didn't generally know, if they didn't have a specific reason to know, was that Treasure Island was one of a dozen or so places around the Bay Area where the military in one way or another staged for nuclear warfare.
Now we're going to play a little video that illustrates that.
My father's name was Nicholas Kane, and he was a colonel, and he attended one of the first classes at the Navy Radiation Defense Laboratory in Treasure Island. He was there to study the effects of radiation and to learn about radiation from the atomic bombs. March 1948, a group has spent the morning on a battered aircraft carrier Independence, scoured and twisted and misshapen from the atomic bomb tests at Bikini. His abandonment brought very little data to the problems of radioactivity.
So that ship that was damaged in the Pacific atomic test was berthed a little bit offshore. And wasn't necessarily contaminating the island itself, but there were schools on the island where they learned to calibrate instruments. There was some dismantling and overhaul operations back in the day at a time when, according to records in the archives, ships were contaminated inside and out and needed to be completely overhauled by atomic bomb tests. And as Katharine mentioned, we have George Moore here. George, just beforehand, was talking with us somewhat about his experience having been based on the island, in addition to being an illustrious expert. George was telling me about some of the little items that they've been finding, radioactive items they've been finding on Treasure Island. Little buttons about the size of maybe a $50. There have been surmises that first they were surmising they were buttons that glowed in the dark that were handed out during the International Exposition. They've surmised that they were potentially targets that personnel used to try out their Geiger counter-like instruments as they were learning to deal with the aftermath of a nuclear bomb.
The story goes that Navy instructors buried radioactive objects in Treasure Island soil in a kind of treasure hunt in which student sailors scanned the dirt with Geiger counters to find radiological objects.
They've just surmised that they were deck markers used on ships, but there hasn't been any sort of direct data connection to these items and and what they might actually be. George, could you give us that anecdote about your experience with those items, and then maybe broaden into the significance of sites like this and the fact that the Cold War had sort of footprints all over the place, and what kinds of things are found now?